Hey guys, welcome to BudgetEDH. I'm your host Mike, and on this week's episode we bring you Dina Soul Steeper out of Strixhaven. Dina is a black and a green for legendary creature Dryad Druid. She has whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life, and you can pay 1 and sacrifice another creature. Dina Soul Steeper gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the sacrificed creature's power. All prices in this video are powered by TCG Player. If you guys are going to be shopping on TCG Player, it would mean the world to me if you guys would use my affiliate link, which I'll put up on the screen right now, and it will also be in the show notes down below. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does help the channel out quite a bit if you use that affiliate link. We also want to thank our other sponsor, Dragon Shield. Dragon Shield has some of the best sleeves and Magic the Gathering accessories on the market at a very affordable price. With Dina, we want to gain a lot of life, and not a lot of life all in one go, but we do want a lot of ways of gaining incremental life over the course of the game. Dina doesn't care about how much life we gain, she just cares that we gain life, and every time we do gain life, her ability is going to trigger. And then we want to have repeatable ways of gaining life so that we're able to drain our opponents each turn or multiple times per turn with Dina's ability. We do have an Aristocrats theme in this deck because Aristocrats works well with gaining life. Whenever a creature dies with some of our Aristocrats creatures on the battlefield, they're going to drain our opponents for 1, and we're going to gain a life, which is going to also make Dina trigger to make our opponents lose 1 life as well. We do have quite a few value engines in this deck where if our creatures die, we'll be able to draw cards. If our creatures die, we'll be able to do other things as well. And then there are a couple of combos in the deck, not in the main version of the deck, but we do have a couple of combos in the upgraded version, which we'll go over at the end of the video. Let's go over the stats of this deck. So we've got 10 ramp cards in here. We've got 17 ways of drawing cards. We've got 10 ways of interacting with our opponents. We've got 29 ways of gaining life, which is really important in this deck. We've got 13 Aristocrats or payoff spells in this deck as well. And then we've got 37 lands. The asterisk is because a couple of these lands are modal double face cards. Let's get into the deck tech. We're going to start out this deck tech by talking about all of the ways that we have in this deck of gaining life. Usually in my deck techs, I go over all the ramp spells, all the card draw spells, all of that. We're going to try something a little bit different with this deck tech video. We're going to just go over all of the key cards. We're going to go over all the cards that are essential to the theme, and then we're also going to add in an upgrade section at the end of the video, including a deck list with the upgraded version of the deck. I believe we add 5 cards into this deck and take 5 cards out. So first up, we've got Essence Warden. It's a elf that whenever another creature enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life. Death Greeter is a creature that whenever another creature dies, you gain a life. And then Profane Memento, whenever a creature card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you gain 1 life. I really like all these. They're really cheap. They only cost 1 mana each. And then they all have ways of triggering a way of gaining life multiple times in a turn or over the course of the game. And like I said in the beginning of the video, we don't care about how much life we gain with Dina. We just care that we gain some amount of life. So little bits of incremental life are going to be more important to this deck than gaining a ton of life in one go. Next up, we've got Tablet of the Guilds. When it enters the battlefield, you choose 2 colors. Whenever you cast a spell, if it's at least one of the chosen colors, you gain 1 life for each of the chosen colors it is. We've also got Witherbloom Apprentice, which is a new one out of Strixhaven. It's got Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then I've got Scavenging Ooze in here, which I really like. It's a great card to include in your deck for graveyard hate, and it also has life gain on it as well. You can exile a target card from a graveyard. If it was a creature card, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and you gain 1 life. Next up, we've got Bantu's Monument. It's a legendary artifact. Black creature spells you cast cost 1 less to cast, which is really nice. And then whenever you cast a creature spell, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. This is going to trigger quite a bit. We do have 30 creatures in this deck, so we will be able to get a lot of value off of Bantu's Monument in here. Then we've got Retreat to Hagra, which has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you get to choose 1. Target creature gets +1/+0 and gains Death Touch until end of turn, and then each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then a similar card that also has a landfall type ability on it is Courser of Crufix. Play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play the top card of your library if it's a land card. Both really great abilities. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life as well. So similar to Retreat to Hagra, whenever we play lands, we gain 1 life. Bonti's Monument, whenever we play a creature, we gain a life as well. And then next up, we've got Ayara, First of Locthwain. Whenever it or another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And I really like this because you can sacrifice another black creature to draw a card. We do have a lot of ways of making little worms and other tokens in this deck that we can sacrifice to get some value off of them and draw cards. And then we've got Roots of Life. This is an older one out of Mirage. Whenever you play it, choose islands or swamps. Whenever a land of the chosen type that target opponent controls becomes tapped, gain 1 life. Next up, we've got Roots of Life. It's an older one on Mirage. Whenever you play it, choose islands or swamps. And this has been changed. The Oracle text on this is different, so I do want to make note of that here. And it does say on the card, whenever a land of the chosen type that a target opponent controls becomes tapped, gain a life, but it has been changed to whenever a land of the chosen type and opponent controls becomes tapped, gain 1 life. So this will work on all of your opponents. You don't have to target an opponent with this. Anytime an opponent taps whichever one you choose, you'll gain 1 life. And in Commander, most players are going to be playing islands or swamps. They are 2 of the most powerful colors in Commander. You're not going to really find a lot of situations where you're not going to have an opponent that's playing islands or swamps in their deck. Next up, let's go over some of the sack outlets that we have in this deck. Now, since we are playing an Aristocrats theme, we do want ways of having our creatures die in this deck to be able to get value off of them dying, to be able to drain our opponents, and then to be able to use Dina's ability to drain them even further. So first up, we've got Viscera Seer. It's a creature that lets you sack a creature to scry 1. This used to be a $3 or $4 card, and it was recently reprinted in Commander Legends, so now it is down to 10 cents. It's a really great card in any Aristocrats theme build. Then we've got a couple of new ones. We've got 10 the Pests out of Strixhaven as an additional cost to cast a spell, sack a creature. Create X 1/1 black and green pest creature tokens with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life, where X is a sacrifice creature's power. I really like pest tokens. Wish there was a lot more ways to make them. There's really not. Then we've got Plum the Forbidden. It's an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you may sacrifice 1 or more creatures. When you do, copy this spell for each creature sacrificed this way. You draw a card and you lose 1 life. I really like this. It works well with Magecraft triggers because you'll be able to copy the spell multiple times if you sacrifice multiple creatures. This is basically going to let you cash in all your pest tokens and other little tokens that you have in this that you have on the battlefield and be able to draw some cards off of it. Next up, we've got Savra, Queen of the Golgari. It's a legendary creature. Whenever you sacrifice a black creature, you may pay 2 life. If you do, each other player sacrifices a creature, which is really nice. Whenever you sack a green creature, you also could gain 2 life. So this is going to not only let you control the board by sacrificing creatures and making your opponents sacrifice, it's also going to let you gain a lot of life over the course of the game, which is perfect with Dina. Next up, we've got Verasko, Golgari Queen. She's a planeswalker. Whenever you sacrifice another permanent, you may sacrifice another permanent. If you do, gain 1 life and draw a card, which is perfect. It lets us sacrifice, also lets us gain a life, and also draw cards. This is really great +2 ability on her. She also has a -3, destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. And then for her -9, you get an emblem. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, that player loses the game. You're not going to see that very often. You are going to be plussing her quite a bit to get that value, to be able to gain life, deal damage to your opponent with Dina, also draw cards. Then we've got Izoni, Thousand-Eyed. It's a legendary creature with Undergrowth. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token for each creature card in your graveyard, and you can play a black and a green to sacrifice another creature. You gain a life and a draw card. This checks all the boxes. It's going to put a lot of tokens on the battlefield, which we can sacrifice later to get some value. When they die, we can draw cards. Also gives you a sacrifice outlet on here. Also lets you gain life and draw cards as well. It's kind of the full package. It is kind of expensive though at 6 mana. And then last but not least, we've got a card out of Battle for Zendikar. We've got Vampiric Rites. It's 1 black mana for an enchantment. Pay 1 and a black and sack a creature. You gain 1 life and draw a card. This is a really nice card, very cheap. It has been going up in price a little bit based on these decks that have come out. For 2 mana, you can sack a creature, gain a life and draw a card. Again, it's going to check all the boxes of what we're looking for in this deck. Next up, we've got our ways of draining our opponents whenever creatures die. First up, we've got Zulaport Cutthroat. Whenever Zulaport Cutthroat or another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I like this one because it's a symmetrical effect. It works on all of our opponents. So whenever a creature dies, it's going to deal 1 damage to each of them, and then you gain 1 life total. Blood Artist, a little bit different. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, so that's any creature, not just ones that you control, so that is one thing to note. Target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So the upside is that this works with any creature that dies, even your opponent's creatures. The downside is it targets a player to lose 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then we got Bastion of Remembrance. This is another one out of Ikoria. When it enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So this is going to give you a token when it enters the battlefield, and it's also going to act as a Zulaport Cutthroat on an enchantment as well. Next up, let's go over some of the ways that we're able to draw some cards in this deck. Now, I do feel like it's important to go over that in this deck because we do have some really great card draw engines in here. We do have a lot of ways of drawing cards whenever our creatures die, since we are playing an Aristocrats theme. So we'll go into those cards here next. So first up, we've got one of the best equipment in the game. We've got Skull Clamp. Whenever a equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards, and it does give equipped creature +1/-1. So on those pest tokens and other tokens that we're able to create in this deck, you can equip it with Skull Clamp for 1 and then be able to draw 2 cards off of it. Next up, we've got Grim Haruspex and Dark Prophecy. Whenever another creature you control dies, draw a card. Dark Prophecy also drains you for 1, and Grim Haruspex does say non-token creature, whereas Dark Prophecy does not. Then we've got Moldivine Reclamation. Whenever a creature you control dies, you gain a life and draw a card. So strictly better than the other ones, but does cost 5 mana instead. You will get that gain a life trigger, which will work well with Dina with this card. Then we've got Fecundity. It's an enchantment. Whenever a creature dies, that creature's controller may draw a card. Now, I do like this card, but it does work for your opponents as well. So there's one thing to make note of with this. Will give your opponents some value when their creatures die. Then we've got Beast Whisperer. I really like this card a lot. Put in a lot of my green decks, as you'll notice if you watch the channel. It's a creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you can draw a card. There's a lot of abilities like this that you can play in here, but I didn't want to go crazy on that because I wanted some of the ones wherever your creatures die, because we do lean more heavily into that theme than playing creatures. Then we've got Well of Lost Dreams. It's an artifact. It does come in the pre-constructed deck. Whenever you gain life, you may pay X, where X is less than or equal to the amount of life you gained. If you do, draw X cards. Lets you draw cards for whenever you gain life, which we're going to be gaining a lot of life in this deck, so it's a really great card to include in here. Next up, let's go over a couple of the utility cards that we have in this deck that don't really fit into any of the other categories. So first up, we've got Valentine, Dina the Vain. He's a 1 black creature with Menace and Lifelink. If a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, you may pay 2. If you do, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. I really like this card a lot. It's very cheap, comes down very early, puts some graveyard hate onto the board, so whenever your opponent's creatures die, they go to exile, and then also has a way of making pest tokens, which, like I was saying earlier in the video, are very good in this deck. Pest tokens are perfect. They're exactly what you want. Whenever they die, they're going to gain you life, and then they work well with all of our aristocrat theme that we have. This does have a backside to the card. We don't really care about it. Valentine is exactly what we want to play. And then we've got Phyrexian Reclamation. It's a 1 black enchantment. You can pay 1 and a black and pay 2 life. Return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. I do like having a way of when certain creatures in this deck die, we have ways of getting them back. Our aristocrats, we don't have a ton of them in here. If our opponents remove them, we want a couple ways of bringing them back and putting them back onto the battlefield. Then we've got Elhamret's Archive. Whenever you gain life, you gain twice that much life instead. And if you draw a card except the first one you draw in each of your draw steps, draw 2 cards instead. Very powerful card. It is expensive, but this does come in the Witherbloom pre-constructed deck. So if you have that and you're making Dina, I do recommend putting this in the deck since you'll have it anyway. It is a very great card to include. Then we've got Marauding Blight Priest. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So this is Dina on a common creature out of Zendikar Rising. I do like having another version of this in the deck, and if you have both of them on the battlefield at the same time, each one will trigger, which is nice. Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So similar to Dina, except it's going to work if you gain a bunch of life all in one go. It will deal all that damage to your opponent, but only to one target opponent, not to all of them. It also has a ability you can pay 5. Creatures you control gain lifelink until end of turn, so it gives you a way of gaining a bunch of life as well. Sejmore Witch is one of my favorite cards out of Strixhaven. It is a creature with Menace and Ward, pay 3 life. Ward basically says you can't target that creature unless you pay that certain cost, so for this one you could target it if you pay 3 life. This one has Magecraft. Whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery spell, you get to create a pest token, which is fantastic. in this deck. Next up, let's go over the 5 cards that I added to this deck with no budget restrictions that are going to upgrade this deck and make it a little bit more powerful than the $100 version. So first up, we've got Belladrose Witherbloom. It's a 7 mana creature with flying. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token. And then you can pay 10 life, untap all lands you control, activate this ability once per turn. So like I said in the video, making pests is very powerful. With Dina, anytime you gain life with those pests, it's going to trigger and Dina's going to deal 1 damage to each of your opponents. So making 3 pest tokens every rotation of the table is very powerful. In addition, this card also has a very, very powerful ability. You can pay 10 life and untap all your lands. So this basically can come down on turn 7 or even sooner. You can pay 10 life. You can basically play this card for free if you'd like. Now we did take out Dread Presence, which is a very good card in its own right, but not as powerful as Belladrose Witherbloom. Next up, we've got an old one out of Betrayers of Kamigawa. We've got Life Gift. Whenever a land comes into play, you may gain 1 life. So this is anytime a land comes into play, not when you put one into play. If your opponents put one into play, you're going to gain a life as well. That makes this card very, very good. So anytime your opponent puts a land into play, you're going to gain a life. Dina's going to trigger and deal 1 to each of your opponents. That's going to deal a lot of damage each turn rotation that this is out there with Dina. Now we did take out Roots of Life, which is similar to Life Gift, except it's not as good. It's way more restrictive than Life Gift. It only works with islands or swamps and only works when opponents tap them, not when you tap them as well. Next up, we're going to put in Aetherflux Reservoir. It's an artifact. Whenever you cast a spell, you gain 1 life for each spell you've cast this turn. And you can pay 50 life and it deals 50 damage to target creature or player. So every time you cast a spell, you're going to gain a life. And if you cast multiple spells in a turn, it'll start to go up the chain and you'll gain even more. Now, this is a great card in a storm build, which we don't have. This is really just in here because you'll gain the incremental life every time you cast a spell. And you will have times with this deck where you'll be over 50 life and you can just kill one opponent. If they're going to about to win the game, if they're the biggest threat, you can just kill them with Aetherflux Reservoir. It's a very good card in a life gain deck. We're going to take out Elixir of Immortality. It's a card that lets you shuffle it back into your library with your graveyard and gain 5 life. I do like it in the deck, but I don't like it that much because we do want to keep stuff in our graveyard to recur it back later with stuff like Phyrexian Reclamation, which we went over earlier. And we do have some graveyard synergies in here as well. So it is one of the easier ones to take out of this deck. Next up, we've got a powerful one. It's just like Veto. It's Sanguine Bond. It's an enchantment. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. It is a 5-mana enchantment. It has been reprinted a few times. It is in the pre-con deck. It's only $1. So you may be asking, oh, why did you put a $1 card as an upgrade? Because it combos with the next card that we're going to talk about. And I don't like having this card in there without the other card because it is a 5-mana enchantment, which we already have Veto in the deck, etc. But if you are going to put the next card on the list in the deck, you definitely should put Sanguine Bond in as well. It's a 2-card combo, will win you the game pretty much instantly. Tend the Pest is what we're going to take out. I do like the card, but it's not as good as having the Sanguine Bond combo in here, so that's why we took it out. And then the card that Sanguine Bond combos with is Exquisite Blood. This one hasn't been reprinted in a while, so it's very expensive. It's $47. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. So with this and Sanguine Bond on the battlefield, if an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. And then Sanguine Bond says when you gain that much life, an opponent loses that much life. So as you can see, it will just kind of go in a circle and will kill your opponents. All they have to do is lose a life or you gain a life and they all die. And we are going to take out Witherbloom Command. It is a pretty good card in its own right, but it's not as powerful as some of the other cards that we're including in here. So I did decide to take it out. Thank you so much for watching our video today. If you like this video and you want to see more budget commander content, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And you can also check us out on patreon.com/BudgetEDH. There's a bunch of different tiers and ways to interact with us outside of YouTube. We'll see you guys next time.